Good morning and Happy New Year. We are delighted to have you join us for our first webinar in 2019. You may have noticed that our technology has changed. New year, new platform. We also have a new schedule. We've launched this at the top of the hour for 30 minutes. We had our first one at 9 o'clock Central Time, and it was awesome. So we thank you guys for joining us. My name is Michelle Mott, and if any of you are having any technical difficulties, Dana is standing by. Jot down her phone number, 515-221-2688, if you have any technical difficulties. But let's get started talking about inspirational leadership. The platform we're using is Zoom, and so we want to make sure that everybody, if you're not familiar with it, knows how some of the features work. You can, again, zoom in and zoom out or make the show content as large as you'd like. We also know that many of our clients are involving multiple people at one site, and they're projecting in on a large screen in the classroom, so we encourage you to do that. A feature that I'd like to make it interactive is the chat feature. So if you would click chat at the bottom of the screen to bring up the chat box on the right, and then click the drop down and choose all panelists and attendees, type in your message, and then what you can do is just hit, let me see if I can do this, multitask. You type a message, and then the message is apparent to myself as well as all on attendees. I'm going to use this feature to ask you some questions, as well as if you've got any questions, which we had several throughout the morning. That can be, oh, snowy Minnesota. Yes, Tiffany, thank you. I know that Iowa's going to be getting some as well. If you don't have audio for your computer, please call in the number in the email, and that way then the quality of the sound is good as well. All right, well, let me make sure that I can get this technology working there. All right, here we go. Why do we do monthly webinars? Well, first of all, we find it's a way that we can give you a remote dose of motivation, whether you utilized our programs or services or not, as well as expose you or introduce to you the variety of different inspiring programs and products that we offer. This particular month, we're going to help you learn how to use a 360-degree feedback assessment to help understand yourself and help others give you feedback. And what I'd like to do to start off is using your chat box, chat feature. I'd like for you to type in if you have or have not ever been exposed to using a 360-degree feedback. And if yes, please let us know which one you've used. The handouts that we're using each webinar is attached to the instructions, so hopefully you've had a chance to look at and print those off, because the most we're going to be looking at is the actual sample of a profile. There's also a 2-page brochure, and there's the upcoming webinar schedule for 2019. Thank you, guys. I see that all is typing in that many of you have not yet used a 360 instrument, so I'm going to talk about that process. Now, the bonus for you taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us is if you fill out the evaluation when you close out of the webinar, if you give us feedback, we will give you a special offer discount to experience the Everything Disc 360 for Leaders Profile, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. I do want to announce the schedule. Like I said, is 3 minutes or 3 times 30 minutes at the top of the hour Central Standard Time. We continue to have people share the schedule with others, so I encourage you to do so. Registration is now open for the next month's webinar. So Andy Stanley from Smart Leadership believes that leaders who don't listen will eventually be surrounded by people who have nothing to say. And what that means to me is that leaders who are intimidating or use inappropriate forms of communication lose the credibility as well as the trust of their leaders, members. So what is a 360-degree feedback process? Typically, it's a group of coworkers that give feedback to an employee, It's generally asked for by a manager and leader, and I want to make sure that everybody is familiar. When I say the term leader today, leader can mean it's in your title, or maybe because you are in a leadership position, this tool would be beneficial. It doesn't matter if you have direct reports or not. This tool, it can basically be used for your leadership development. Typically, it's different than the performance review, because the performance review focuses on job goals and productivity, but we find a lot of our clients bring this into and align it with the annual performance review process. And last, 360 focuses more directly on the skills and strategies and the competencies that it takes to be a leader. So for those of you who are not familiar with how a 360 feedback process works, we've broken it into 3 simple steps. The first step would be to identify at least 3 people to give you feedback in your role as a leader. Now, our platform uses 4 different categories, and you don't have to use all 4 categories. However, you do have to have a minimum of 3 people complete or give you feedback. For instance, there is a minimum for certain categories. So if you are going to use the feature called manager as a rater, which means your boss, you have to have at least 1 person whom you report to fill it out. You can also have peers. So let's say you're on a leadership team. I know one of our clients who's on has a number of different leaders that are participating in this month's webinar. So you could potentially give each other feedback. And then for those of you who do have direct reports, you could have at least 2, and there's no limit to how many direct reports you have give you feedback. So any combination, but at least 3 people giving you feedback. Excuse me. You can also create your own category. Let's say that you work with volunteers, or you wanted to have your customers give you feedback. You could develop your own group of raters. Like I said, you don't have to use all 4 of those categories. However, if you do use a particular category, like manager, you have to have at least 1. Peers and direct reports have to have at least 2 to constitute a group. The second step in developing or creating this kind of tool or this feedback is each rater that you select will be given or sent through email an online assessment to describe you as a leader from 2 perspectives. One is, how do they see you as a leader, your current behaviors? And then the second that I think is neat about this tool is what they would like to see. What would be a desired behavior that you're not currently displaying? Know that also you as a leader will fill out your own self-assessment, so you can have a comparison as to how you see yourself compared to others. Then once all the raters are complete, you'll be given a feedback profile called the 363 for leaders. And what I'd like to do is, again, use the chat box to ask if you are familiar with the family of assessments called Everything DISC. And again, if you would type in the chat box, yes, if you have, or if you're familiar with it. I have been using DISC as a tool to develop a language that can help you understand yourself and your behaviors, as well as helping you understand others. And it really, we have several of our clients help use this as a cultural tool. So step 3 then is to receive this feedback, and it helps you understand yourself from a couple of different perspectives. Oh, thanks, Tiffany, for the endorsement there on Everything DISC. This particular tool will explore 8 approaches to your leadership behavior, and it's not to categorize or it's not to label you when you fill out any kind of Everything DISC profile, but like I said, it's going to give you some language in a given application. So this is 8 approaches as a leader. There's one that talks about you in a sales environment, you in the workplace in general. So there's a variety of different applications. And what makes this a 363 degree instrument is that it will take from the feedback and identify 3 personalized strategies that you need to focus on to be more effective as a leader. So it really has a built-in action plan for you. So let's take a look at the results of the profile. We won't be able to go through it in as much detail as we would with a feedback session, but again, to take advantage of your opportunity to complete a profile, we at least want to give you an exposure. So turn to page 2. Some of the pages in every profile are the same, and then some are customized. And page 2 happens to be one of those that is a generic introduction to everything DISC. It's a cornerstone principle. And like I said, it helps you to understand yourself being the first step in being more effective when leading others. Also on that page, you will see the circle. And around the circle are the 8 approaches that this particular assessment tool uses to describe behavior. And we're going to go into more depth, but that's at a glance the 8 approaches or 8 competencies that you will get feedback from. So let's take a look at page 3. Page 3 is a customized narrative based on responses that you filled out as a leader, as well as those who rated you. And so we always encourage people to take a highlighter and highlight things that really resonated well with you. Or if there's something that doesn't make sense or you question, flag it, put a circle around it. And especially as a 360 instrument, ask those that rated you to give you more information to help you understand why you're being described in that particular manner. On page 4 is the 8 approaches along with their 3 practices. So if I could kind of help you to understand how this profile is created, there are 8 approaches, those words that are on the outside of that circle, and then within each slice of the pie are 3 best practices that research has found to help display that type of leadership approach. So for instance, as you look at the first one, pioneering, oops, let me go back. Pioneering, the 3 are finding opportunities, stretching boundaries, and promoting bold approach. And we're going to take a look at each of those approaches and their 3 practices. On page 5, it shows you at a glance how, in blue shaded area, how the raters as a group collectively saw you. So it blends how you, the manager, how the leaders, how your direct reports saw you. And it looks kind of like a spider web. The closer the point is to each of the approaches means you spend more, it's perceived by the raters that you use that approach more often. So you'll see at a glance that Taylor tends to use the approach commanding more often, for instance, than being humble or deliberate. Now let's take a look at the definitions of those 8 approaches. The first approach is that of a pioneering leader. And the terminology that I want you to be familiar with is, it's not saying that you are a single approach. You take a combination of different approaches as a leader. But the pioneering describes the way in which you encourage the group to think creatively about their options and take chances on new opportunities. So as this new year rolls around, if you are pioneering, you're looking for new ways, new ideas to improve your team's effectiveness. The skill of energizing is your ability to demonstrate as well as share your excitement or your enthusiasm for the group's goal. And you have a tendency of developing a network of professional connections, which means you're able to promote and encourage people to get involved and get on board with particular projects or goals. The affirming leader is one who's approachable, someone who can take and handle good news as well as shares or empathizes with concerns, and people around them feel good because they create a safe environment and are willing to honor their contributions. The fourth approach is that of being an inclusive leader. This behavior is when you get a variety of people together in a decision-making process, and you recognize that it's important to get everybody's involvement in the decision-making process, and you are able to show concerns for different opinions and feelings. The humble leader is one who maintains a modest yet composed demeanor and can be relied upon to make decisions fairly that don't always mean that you take charge of what you want, but you are willing to honor and consider what's best for the team or the situation. The fifth approach is that of being deliberate. This leader behaves or provides a sense of stability for the group by communicating clearly and ensuring that decisions are made carefully. So you'll see that some of these are complementary skills. So even though you want to be bold and make new decisions, you also want to be able to provide some sense or feeling of stability for your team. The seventh approach is that of being resolute. This leader has high standards not only for themselves but for their group, and insists on using methodology to maximize efficiency. So for instance, and Dana can attest, that I like to use checklists or templates. It's ways that it minimizes your ability to have to make new decisions, and it assures that there's more consistency or compliance. And then the last approach is that of being a commanding leader. This is a leader who takes charge, is willing to step up with confidence, and urges others to make sure that they are focused and able to get results. So we're going to take more depth look at that, but that's the 8 general approaches. Let's take a look at page 6. On page 6, once again, you'll see that web describing in blue how your raters saw you, but this also does an overlay using dotted lines that illustrates how you see yourself. So as you see, Taylor sees himself displaying at least all of the 8 approaches, in addition to putting more energy into commanding, pioneering, humble. So there is a little bit of difference as to how he sees himself compared to others. Then on page 7, there is a breakdown by group. So if you're curious, okay, how did your manager see you compared to how your peers, your direct reports, and others, you can use this page and you can see their differences. So at a glance, you can see that Taylor's manager saw him demonstrating much more energy in those 8 approaches than his direct reports. And you'll see in parentheses there that there are 10 raters for the direct report. So it illustrates how many actually completed the results. Starting on page 8 is more detailed feedback on each of the approaches using the 3 practices. So let's take a look at what that means. First of all, on page 8, to understand what's there, there's a couple of pieces of information. At the top, in a more narrative summary, you can read about your highlights. So as a result of the pioneering approach, feedback tells Taylor that he tends to rate himself a little higher on the pioneering approach than his raters do. There's a moderate approach of agreement among his raters and how often he uses the pioneering approach. Because of this, he may notice some contradictive comments from the raters because they have different perspectives. And finally, he should be aware that his manager thinks that he uses the pioneering approach more often than the other raters do. The legend at the bottom illustrates what the symbols mean. So the circle indicates how he saw himself. The dot, the black dot, indicates how his manager saw him. The red square is how the peers. The blue triangle are the direct reports. And then finally, the green diamond shape is the feedback given from the other category. Each of the 3 practices are described. So the 3 practices on this page include finding opportunities, stretching boundaries, and promoting bold actions. And each of the 3, or each of the approaches then have 3 practices. And I today want to give you at least an understanding of what kind of practices or best practices are described in this tool. So as I mentioned, the pioneering approach, the 3 practices for energizing approach on page 9 describe how you show enthusiasm, build professional networks, and rally people to achieve goals. Page 10, the practice of an affirming leader is one that is approachable. They acknowledge contributions of others, and they're able to create a positive environment. Page 11, the 3 practices of an inclusive leader are those that stay open to input, they show diplomacy, and they're willing to and able to facilitate a nice dialogue, open and honest. Page 12 will give you feedback on your approach, your humble approach. In other words, how well do you maintain composure, how modest, and are you fair-minded? Page 13 describes the 3 practices of a deliberate approach. That is your ability to communicate with clarity, promoting disciplined analysis, and providing a sense of stability to your team or your group or your department. Page 14 are the 3 practices of a resolute leader, and that is your ability to set and communicate high expectations. How well do you speak up about problems? And are you interested in improving methods or methodology? And then the last of the 8 approaches on page 15 will give you feedback on your confidence, your ability to take charge, and how well do you focus and earn or obtain results. So that gives you a lot of information in those pages. And again, we feel that probably the best way to learn about this would be to experience it for yourself. But I do want to give you kind of a summary of what also is included from all of that data. On page 16, as a result of your own as well as your raters, there are 3 practices identified by your raters as your greatest strengths. So for tailors, it's being approachable, showing confidence, and taking charge. On the other hand, at the bottom of page 16, you'll also see that again, from the rater's response, there are 3 strategies for his development. Those being in blue, showing diplomacy, communicating with clarity, and staying open to input. Thus, the reason why this tool is called 363, because it already creates the start of an action plan. On pages 17 through 19, each of those 3 areas for development are further described. A couple of pieces of information to know what's on those pages. First of all, you'll discover why this particular practice was chosen based on the rater's response. The second section gives you some statements that what we find to be your emotional intelligence. So for instance, on Taylor's, it describes him as being straightforward, and therefore it may come across as being blunt or aggressive. When there is a disagreement, he may spend time making points, then listening to others. And the other statement that says he should be aware of is that he sometimes fails to take people's feelings into account. So this is a great way to help the leader become aware of his or her behavior and the reaction to others. And then with that comes some tips. So some built-in best practices to improve the leader's effectiveness. Then starting on page 20 are some further details that you could look at to understand, first of all, the behaviors for each practice. So if you think about, there's 3 levels of information built into this tool. There's the 8 approaches, there's the 3 practices, and now this goes into the actual behavior. So it's a very behavioral-based instrument. So for each of the behaviors, using a 7-point scale, you'll see how each group's or each rater's scored. And then the other piece that I really like about this is that we mentioned that this not only describes your current behavior, but this last column describes what % of your raters would like to see this more often. So this is where they are telling you how they would like you or hope that you would change or develop your effectiveness as a leader. And then the last section of this tool provides an opportunity to read comments. Now, you might think, well, how did they have a chance to write in comments? Well, this uses a technology called Comment Smart. And raters choose from a highly tested behavioral focused list of comments that give richness, context, and productive feedback, because whenever we've administered open-ended surveys, a lot of times people don't know how to give tactful or constructive feedback without sounding critical, or it can really sometimes do more damage. So you can read more specifics about what they would like to see improved on. So I know that was a lot of information in a short period of time. The other piece of information we gave you is a nice description of the brochure, of the process itself. And we are more than welcome to kind of walk and talk you and set you up. Dana has had a lot of experience in helping our clients administer this. There are some other reports that are available beyond the individual profile. So for instance, if you are the person going to be facilitating the feedback, if you don't want us to do it, you can do it yourself. There's no cost to this coaching supplement. And what this does is allows the coach, if they're not familiar with the DISC style, to understand some background information, as well as 24 leadership practices ranked by the raters. And then the other piece that's neat is that it also, given the database of leaders that have completed this profile, those that have gone before you, it compares your results or your norms to all the leaders that have completed this. The other tool, again, for those of you who are thinking about having a variety or a number or all of your leaders do this within your organization, we would suggest that you generate a facilitator group report. And what this does is it creates a report that at a glance shows the results of all of your leaders. So it could be your leadership team. You could pick and choose however many you would like. And then it gives a summary of their strengths as well as their areas for development. As an organizational consultant, I would use this to make sure that I understood what needed to be on the radar for leadership development topics. Excuse me. The cost of using these tools, the cost for the Everything DISC 363 for leaders is $225. Now know that that is regardless of how many raters you have, and there is no limit. So whether you have the minimum 3 or if you have 30, fill it out for you as the leader, the cost is the same. Like I mentioned, there is no cost for us to generate the coaching supplement. And like I mentioned, as an organization, once all of your leaders or however many leaders you want to have fill this out for one-time cost, we would generate the facilitator group report. Now, here's the bonus. As participating in this webinar and completing the evaluation form that you'll be given right after you close out of the webinar, we're going to give you a 25% off, which means for $169 per leader, they can have the process administered for them. So it means that each of your leaders can develop their own list of raters, and we will generate the results and give you a complimentary consultation. If there is more than one person within your organization, and we did this just last week for last month's webinar, we had 3 leaders of an organization. We'll just facilitate it as a Zoom meeting. So feel free to have one or all of your leaders take advantage of this wonderful offer. I do see that there's some questions coming in, and I think Dana is answering some of them. Oh, is there a time frame as to when we should utilize this? Dana, I'm going to have you answer that question. We didn't put a deadline on it. Well, let's do it. Here's what I'm going to do, just because I think there's a sense of urgency. Let's do it between now and the end of the month, just because I think it's important, because we need to start looking at the next month's webinar, but let's do it between now and the end of January. Thanks, Tiffany. All right. Again, we love your questions during as well as after. If something doesn't make sense, I know that was a lot of information in a short period of time, but we will, and I will say, Dana will hold your hand through the administrative part of it, and it's just an amazing process. Once again, we want you to join us in our future webinars. Next month, we're going to talk about the 5 behaviors of a cohesive team. In March, we're going to explore how to engage today's employees. In April, we're going to expose you to our brand new attitude material called Attitude Resolving Difficult Situations in the Workplace. In May, our signature program called Staying Positive in a Negative World. And in June, we're going to talk about how can teams improve their effectiveness by caring. Once again, we remind you after you close out of the webinar to take time to fill out the survey for your comments, especially because this is a new format, new platform. How easy, how well did it work on your end? And we do encourage you to take advantage between now and the end of the month to administer the Everything Disc for any or all of your leaders. So with that, we sign off. Have a safe and warm weekend. I know some of you are going to be hunkering down, but we thank you for joining us. I also want to thank Sarah, who's our intern, for helping to create this PowerPoint presentation. Bye for now, and we look forward to working with you, inspiring you in the future.